Hello there, YouTube. It is I, Saint Riot, returned to you with more Elden Ring PvP. And I think, maybe, perhaps, I have finally finished my first build. It is Redeemed Jeff. Started off as a prisoner. We were using the Darkmoon Greatsword. This is an intelligence and endurance build. So we have 55 intelligence, I believe, 55 vigor, and every other spare point went into endurance. It takes 16 strength to be able to one-hand the Darkmoon Greatsword, so I'm wearing the Star Scourge talisman to get me up to 16 strength from the prisoner, which started at 11, I think, if I remember all this correctly. Meaning I didn't have to put a single point into strength at the cost of losing one of my talisman slots, which is fine. We're also using the Jarsil's Arsenal, which greatly increases our equip load, which allows me to wear heavier armor, which gives me more poise, which is why we're also wearing the Bulgo Talisman, which also increases poise. Poise allows us to trade through an attack, meaning we can swing at someone, they can swing at us, and as long as we have more poise than they do poise damage, we don't get interrupted. I'm using Collapsing Stars because it kills people in one hit. I'm using the Azure Staff, I believe is the name of it. It just increases spellcasting speed, so I cast my spells faster. And you're like, Saint, but what about the staffs that increase damage? As I said, we kill them in one hit, so it doesn't matter. I'm also using Carrion Retaliation on the Carrion Knight Shield. I don't have to feel bad about using it anymore because it has been fixed. It no longer does insane amounts of damage. It no longer looks invisible, etc., etc. I can feel just fine about using this awesome ability on this awesome shield, and I love that. So we have 55 intelligence. The soft cap for damage stats is 50, from what I understand, meaning the first big stat point you're going to hit where you start to see diminishing returns with damage is at 50. I've gone to 55 regardless, because, look at that guy. In previous games, the magic beam of the Moonlight Greatsword did pure magic damage, and as a result, it scaled higher than 50, the beam itself. Our beam does a lot of damage. It does a lot of damage. We have to buff the weapon in order to use it. Thankfully, they have lowered the amount of FP required to use the buff, which means I can now use the buff 3 times in a fight, which is plenty. That's great. I still have one Cerulean Flask so that I can, rebuff 6 times if needed, or mix in some Collapsing Stars if needed. I forget exactly how much poise this build has on it. I believe it's either 61 or 66 is the important breakpoint, which allows me to trade through like Rivers of Blood, for example, katanas and straight swords and things like this. Being able to trade through Rivers of Blood on one occasion is really all I need, because most people who use Rivers of Blood die if you hit them. And as a result, I can hit them now, and they die. The laser beam, I mentioned this in another video, maybe doing a little more damage than I intended, but it's cool. I like it. You could actually make it do more damage, probably, if you wanted to spec out the right talismans for that job with the right Wondrous Physick tier. However, that's not something that interested me. I just wanted to be able to make trades and, poise wizard my way into hitting people with the Moon Sword and then shoot lasers at them. Everything else, just a bonus. Let me go ahead and say here, before the 5-minute mark, that me making a build and making a video about it on YouTube is essentially just me dressing up my Barbie and telling you about my Barbie. This does not mean that I think the weapon is OP or really good or even underrated or whatever. I just think it looks cool, and that's all that matters to me and to 99% of the people who are playing this game. I just, some people think Rivers of Blood and Moonveil looks cool. you know, and that's fine. That's what they like. So this is what I like. I have min-maxed it to the best of my ability, but you know, it shouldn't be confused as being good. I will say, however, in terms of underrated things, I would venture to guess that once again, the one-handed moveset of a Greatsword is probably vastly underrated by the majority of players. Even players who care about such things are probably underrating exactly how good a one-handed Greatsword is because of Poise. The Dark Souls 3 one-handed Greatsword moveset was much better than people gave it credit for, and I suspect that that trend is continuing in Elden Ring. People are probably trying to roll into your one-handed Greatsword, or they're trying to trade through it, or they're trying to challenge it after being hit by it, and all of those things are bad and wrong and will get them beat. So, yeah, one-handed Greatsword probably still pretty good, and by virtue of the fact that this Moonlight Greatsword can be one-handed, I mean, it at least has that. So, at the very worst, it's not bad. I gave myself enough poise to be able to get through Rivers of Blood. We have the Bullgoat Talisman to thank for that. The Bullgoat Talisman in this game, equivalent to the Wolf Ring of the Dark Souls games, except Dark Souls 2, which had the Giant's Ring, I think. I don't know exactly how the Giant's Ring worked, so I'm not going to comment on that. However, it is now time for me to comment about the ones that I do know. So, the Bullgoat Talisman increases your poise, and the more poise you have, the better the returns on it. This is in line with most other talismans or rings in games. For example, if you put on a talisman or a ring that gives you more hit points and it's percentage based, then it stands to reason the more hit points or endurance you already had, the more you're going to get from the ring and or talisman. Okay. So, Dark Souls 3 did the opposite. The Wolf Ring had diminishing returns, and the more poise you already had, the less poise you got from the Wolf Ring. I'm not sure that I like either one of these in terms of how I think it should go. But I would say that perhaps the Dark Souls 1 way of doing things, which I did like, might have been a little too strong. The Dark Souls 1 Wolf Ring just flat gave you 40 poise. That was a lot in Dark Souls 1. 40 poise was quite a bit. It was possible with heavy armors to get, up to and over 100, which was, a meaningful thing. You were going to be able to trade through a lot of stuff with 100 poise. In Elden Ring, I think how they tried to go about balancing this is you don't want to trade with stuff. Stuff hits too hard for you to make a trade. So you have to really, really think about whether or not it's worth it to poise through or even hyper armor through an attack. Hyper armor is basically poise that only applies to weapon attacks. So that is something to consider. Another thing to consider is heavy attacks. Bloodborne had a poise modifier of like 1,000,000% on a fully charged heavy attack. You just were not going to break someone's poise or hyper armor. Sorry, hyper armor. You were not going to break someone's hyper armor when they did a fully charged heavy attack. Dark Souls 3 did a similar thing where a fully charged heavy attack gave you a lot of hyper armor. You would see people use a fully charged Greatsword, usually a Claymore, heavy attack, which was a big poke. They would do that to try and bait you into them because they knew that their hyper armor would still be active when they started up the light attack right afterwards. I'm not sure how they've done that in Elden Ring. I will say I do think there have been occasions where I've made trades that I didn't think I would be able to make if I had a fully charged heavy attack. The fact that I can buff my fully charged heavy attack and give it really good frostbite and a laser, which means it has 2 hitboxes, which means it's hitting twice if it's hitting at point blank range. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. In terms of things I need to change, you're watching it now. In Dark Souls 3, I think it was like 43 poise is the amount, and I'm rounding up. But I think in Dark Souls 3 you needed 43 poise in order to trade a Greatsword versus a two-handed glaive. My opponent here is using a two-handed glaive. I have 61 or 66 poise, and I am constantly being interrupted by everything he does, even when I try and get my hyper armor started up. which is honestly probably a change for the better. A glaive is a big weapon, and it should not be easily poised through. So that's something I have to learn. However, something they have to learn is that a one-handed greatsword is really good. Yeah, so the weapon is not overpowered, it's not OP, it's not secretly underrated, it's just cool looking, and it's a cool build that I made. It's mine, it's my Barbie, this is how I dressed it up. That's all these videos are ever going to be. Unless I happen to think something is good and cool, in which case I will tell you that. But this is a situation where the thing that I like is not great, but fun and looks cool, and that's all that matters to me. I think I've told you everything. Have I told you what's in the Wondrous Physick? It's the Magic Shrouding tier, which gives me an increase to magic damage. It is nerfed in PvP. A lot of things are. They do one thing in PvE, and then they do another thing in PvP. So the tier, for example, it doesn't do its full amount of... It doesn't give you the full buff like it does if you're fighting just enemies or a boss. You're going to get this big buff. In PvP, it's nerfed a bit. You're not going to get the benefit of that full buff. However, since I'm assuming, the magic beam on the Darkmoon Greatsword does purely magic damage. A 10% buff is still significant to purely magic damage. Most players are not armored, spec'd out to take full magic damage. It's going to hurt them regardless of whether or not they're wearing a lot of armor or not. For the most part, the beam does anywhere from 800 to 900 damage on a player. If a person is wearing a Scar Seal or a Sore Seal or whatever they're called, one of those talismans that decreases their absorption. I have seen the moon beams hit for 1300 damage, which is pretty significant when buffed with the flask. I've seen them hit for 1200 when not buffed with the flask. So that's a lot of damage, if you hit somebody with it. So despite the fact that it is nerfed in PvP, it's still pretty good. Also, in the Wondrous Physick, we have a tier, the Leaden Hard tier, which increases our poise. We essentially just can't be interrupted for about 10 seconds. I say that, but you can be interrupted by big attacks, jumping attacks with 2 greatswords, for example. There are plenty of Ashes of War or weapon skills that can interrupt. Headshots will interrupt, things like that. But by and large, you're pretty safe after you use the tier to make whatever trade you want. It's just important to remember that things in this game do a lot of damage, and so trading is not like the most optimal way to play. It's probably not something you want to do against someone who's using dual bleed greatswords, for example. Having said that, I think that that's a change that I like. You shouldn't be incentivized to make trades with every build that you see, regardless of what it's swinging at you. Like, for example, making a trade with a katana, single hit from a katana, making a trade with a single hit of a straight sword, and you're swinging a much bigger weapon. Yeah, sure, make that trade. Go for it. But it just seems kind of silly to, incentivize trading against, 2 great swords or a big magic katana laser. I understand the decision to make poise a little weaker than it was in Dark Souls 1, while still giving us poise passively, unlike how they did in Dark Souls 3. That's pretty much everything, I think, right? I think I've gone over everything. I will now tell you what songs I have used in this video, because people always ask. Now, if someone asks in the comments, they're like, hey, what songs are these? You in the comments can yell at them, and you can make fun of them, because you know that they just didn't listen. The songs that I used for this video were the Bloodborne soundtrack, Ludwig the Holy Blade, from the Hollow Knight soundtrack, Radiance, from the Elden Ring soundtrack, Renala, Queen of the Full Moon, and from Final Fantasy Tactics soundtrack, Under the Stars. So there you go. Here's one of those people that everybody hates, and then another one of those people that everybody hates. It's an invader who doesn't know who his friends are, or he just wants to mash attack with his katana at everything he sees. So I hope that this makes you feel good. This person's going to go away. And then, after that, we're going to make someone else go away. They're one of those people that, you know, no one likes. One of those AFK rune farmers. They go somewhere, they hide in a place where they think no one can get to them, and they use the Taunter's Tongue so that invaders show up, and then they use the ring so that blues will show up, and the blues and the reds fight, and if the reds lose, then the host gains a meager amount of runes. This is not efficient. This is not an efficient way to get runes. This is silly. It's foolish. It doesn't make sense. You're like literally wasting everyone's time, including your own. You're not getting enough for this. This is, you know, you're just not. You're not getting enough for this. I don't care what they told you on the Discord. There are much faster and easier ways to get runes, and people won't hate you, and you won't be blocked by everyone you encounter. Like, I would almost guarantee that like 20% of everyone who has gone into your world has blocked you, which means you're not gonna be able to co-op with those people, or play with those people, or against those people, because they don't like you, because you've wasted their time and everyone else's for nothing, for a meager amount of runes that you could just hop on literally any Discord, Reddit, Twitter, and you could say, hey, would anyone be willing to drop me some runes for my character? And people would probably be like, yes, I will give you the runes, and you don't have to do this garbage. Do it. Do that instead of getting teabagged by me, literally like the nicest guy who invades. And even I teabag you. Jesus. Thanks for watching the video. I'll see you next time. Until then, later y'all.